Good morning again, and welcome to this Conservation Applied Research and Development webinar. I'm Mary Sue Lobenstein, the R&D Program Administrator at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Division of Energy Resources, and with me today is Anthony Fryer, who is a supervisor of the Conservation Improvement Program Unit at the department. He also is the project manager on the research that is the subject of this webinar, and Anthony will be moderating questions and answers at the webinar today. Our presenter is Megan Hoy. Megan is the engagement manager at the Center for Energy and Environment. Megan's work is focused on delivering clean energy impacts through management of planning, pilots, and research services that require innovative engagement techniques, technical information, and analysis. She also works with municipalities, developers, design and construction professionals to transform new construction practice and to create high-performance development models at the building and district scale. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few webinar basics. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. As questions occur to you during the presentation, type them into the Q&A panel on the right bottom side of the WebEx panel and send them to us. Send them to all panelists. We will do our best to answer all questions within the time allocated, but if for some reason we don't get to answer all questions, we will answer them after the webinar via email. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the department's website in a couple of weeks. The slide set from the webinar will also be available at a later date. This webinar is one in an ongoing series designed to summarize the results from research projects funded by Minnesota's Applied Research and Development Fund, which was established in the Next Generation Energy Act of 2007. The purpose of this fund is to help Minnesota utilities achieve their 1.5% energy savings goal. About $2.5 million of this fund is set aside annually for the CARD program, which awards research grants in a competitive request for proposal process. Results from CARD projects provide utilities with data to enhance energy efficiency program designs within their SIP portfolios. As you can see by the pie chart here, CARD projects funded to date have been in all building sectors, as well as some that cross all or multiple sectors. The subject of today's webinar is results from a white paper study in which Megan investigated a utility program model that compensates building owners for energy performance over time, rather than through traditional deemed savings rebates, in order to determine the opportunities and barriers for this approach in Minnesota. Now I'm going to turn it over to Megan to see what she's discovered.
Thank you, Mary Sue. Thank you for the introduction and for your interest in learning more about this topic. Oops. I'm excited to talk to you today about CE's white paper study on commercial whole building pay-for-performance programs and opportunities in Minnesota. I am Megan Hoy, the primary investigator and project manager for this project. We had a great team that included research engineer Dee Shui, building operations engagement specialist Brady Steigoff, and data analyst Robbie Vandergaan. This research greatly benefited from some of the early guidance and final research review provided by the pay-for-performance and building performance experts outside of Minnesota who generously offered their time and peer feedback to support the quality of this study. Thank you to Cheryl Carter and Miriam Borgeson from Natural Resource Defense Council, or NRDC, and Poppy Storm from 2050 Institute in Seattle. This study was selected in the 2017 round of CARD. The purpose of this work was to assess the extent to which whole building pay-for-performance would be a market-accepted utility offering for commercial customers in Minnesota. At the core of the research, CE would identify interested customer segments, explore the barriers and opportunities for implementation, and identify trends that influence the potential need. The scope of this project was both targeted and broad. While the focus was on whole building pay-for-performance in commercial buildings, The scope included determining which market segments would be most appropriate to target and included existing building applications as well as new construction applications, both for electricity and natural gas. Beyond this, we looked broadly at opportunities and barriers for pay-for-performance to incentivize energy savings of all types, asset-based or equipment-based, operational, and behavioral. It is also important to note that while not expressly limited to providing incentives directly to customers, the major focus of our research was to increase energy savings and demand savings through direct incentives to customers. That said, we did capture broad observations about opportunities to provide incentives to second and third parties that help commercial customers. At the onset of our research, we really thought about the need for this research as being twofold. However, as we dove in more, it became more clear that there was, in fact, a notable third reason for exploring pay-for-performance as a concept in Minnesota. First, as Mary Sue stated in the introduction, there continues to be a broad need for new approaches to finding new and cost-effective energy savings to help utilities meet their 1.5% energy savings goal. As with all conservation programs, the mandate here is to identify offerings that can either deliver deeper energy savings or to achieve more efficient energy savings. Second, in other markets, regulators and or utilities value exploring the value of quantifying energy conservation resources and separately demand shifting and demand reductions based on actual performance instead of calculated estimates. In Minnesota, there is an ongoing dialogue about how to account for energy conservation as a resource for the benefit of integrated resource planning and distribution planning, but the extent to which actual performance or meter-based savings would be a more valuable way of measuring these resources has not yet been explored. Lastly, we have already seen advanced metering infrastructure roll out in some small commercial customers in Minnesota Power Service territory as early as in 2001 with successful deployment. With this technology in place and the possibility of it rolling out more broadly to commercial customers in coming years, we see opportunities to better understand how this technology can be leveraged to deliver more customer benefits. Sorry about that. As a white paper study, our research had an emphasis on qualitative data, but we have used both qualitative and quantitative data. On the qualitative side, we conducted a literature review to understand other examples of pay-for-performance across the country, as well as identified barriers and best practices. Interviews and surveys were layered onto this along with the focus group that gathered insights specifically from Minnesota commercial building customers. On the quantitative side, we did gather pre and post energy use retrospectively for 10 buildings to broadly understand performance over time compared to energy use and design performance targets. However, the focus of our quantitative analysis was on 2 building case studies, both existing buildings, from which we were able to explore more anecdotal scenarios and deeper questions for future research. Overall, we had 42 interviews. This table outlines that number of interactions with various stakeholders, both in Minnesota and nationally. Based on literature review findings, commercial customers with building automation systems and on-site energy managers were the target market that resonated the most. In order to test this market segment, our interviews and focus group engagement with customers in Minnesota followed this model to confirm if that market resonated here. Additional interviews allowed us to explore beyond this model market, including interviews with architects, developers, and property portfolio managers in the private and public sectors. We also engaged energy efficiency program providers to explore gaps in which pay-for-performance might have benefit. Without going into great detail, our approach to exploring our qualitative data was really an analysis of barriers and benefits, particularly from the perspectives of the customer and the utility. This information was also used to assess key local target markets and to an extent the channels that pay-for-performance might be best delivered through. On the quantitative data analysis side, while we won't go into great detail about measurement and verification practices in the next hour, it is worth noting how we calculated savings for our 4 new construction buildings and our 6 existing buildings. For existing customers, the baseline for comparison was historic energy use before improvements were made, for which 1 year of data was used. The performance period, the period following improvements and operational changes, was uniformly 3 years. For new construction buildings, the baseline had performance periods that were the same durations. However, the baseline for new construction buildings were based on peer building energy use averages. And peer buildings were defined as those buildings in the same climate zone under the same code and of the same use type. For both new construction and existing buildings, this broad comparison helped us do some high-level observing of what types of buildings might be good candidates for pay-for-performance, and to see generally the extent to which energy use was trending up, down, or flatlining. For our 2 case studies, buildings, we did do a deeper analysis and followed IPMVP option C to determine verified energy savings. Both of these buildings were existing buildings. From here, we also gathered detailed rebates and estimated energy savings data to help illustrate the practical benefits and challenges of a pay-for-performance incentive. A needle in a haystack. As with much research, what you think you set out to look for is not always what you find, and in this case, some of the most interesting findings were those needles in the haystack, or seemingly minor observations, perhaps along the way. I find that it's always helpful to share what I want you to hear before I say it in a longer way, over the next couple of 30 plus minutes. So I'm going to share our key takeaways before diving into the details. Some national observations were that pay-for-performance programs in other markets are seeing mixed results of getting at deeper savings. Yet, existing buildings and new construction offerings are expanding. At the national level, aggregator models is most prevalent, although not the focus of this study. Minnesota utility input provided us with some takeaways, such as advanced metering is coming. Some utilities express interest in capturing meter-based energy savings for the purposes of resource and distribution planning. Also, the risk of customer satisfaction can be higher than simply the cost of developing a program. Continuing on Minnesota customer input, high-performing and high-potential commercial customers showed interest in pay-for-performance almost uniformly, especially when connected to technical assistance, when the program would be connected to technical assistance. Customers expressed that reducing project payback by 6 months or more would be motivating to them in sort of that risk versus reward thinking. Some barriers in Minnesota are that M&V methodologies continue to be reported as too costly or onerous for cost-effective applications, at least in the near term. Currently, there is no clear pathway for how utilities can capture meter-based energy savings, so how might this coexist with deemed savings? So before going any further, what is pay-for-performance? Pay-for-performance is an incentive mechanism that is based on actual energy savings versus anticipated energy savings, such as deemed savings. There is quite a bit of nuance that is packed into these first 5 words at the top of the slide: whole building pay for performance? First, let's talk through the concept of pay for performance. So orienting us here, on the x-axis is time and on the y-axis is energy use. The navy line to the left of the green bar shows what baseline energy use might look like before an improvement or an intervention takes place. This could be equipment installations or changes in operating schedules or systematic occupant behavior change. To the right of the green bar, you see the baseline energy use projected into the future as a green line, and that navy line continues to show actual energy use. The difference between the baseline and the new actual energy use, or the blue shaded area, is the amount of energy that a customer is saving compared to a baseline. These energy savings are how a customer would get compensated under a pay-for-performance model. Now for the whole building part of the equation. This is an entirely separate and growing concept on its own. The traditional energy conservation model has looked at energy savings on a per measure basis. Under a whole building approach, a utility is interested in all savings that a building achieves and may choose to identify those through measures or not, meaning this can just be captured as total savings based on meter data. Overall, the benefits of whole building pay for performance are threefold. Whole building scope aligns with customer perspective, thinking really at a project scale across a whole building, not measure by measure. Number two, performance-based approach or meter-based really helps incent operators based on performance. And third, meter-based approach can measure actual conservation in DR or demand response resources. One example project that we're not going to talk about in much detail is the Bullitt Center in Seattle, Washington, and something that we don't have time to go into today, but is another great case study for reference. While we have provided a broad definition of pay for performance of what this means and how it implemented varies widely depending on the program you are looking at. To give you a sense of the variation, here we have highlighted a handful of characteristics. The performance period varies widely, from 1 year to 3 to 5 years, up to 20 years. Note that re-enrolling for a customer is ideal. So even if we are looking at a 1 year performance period, that ideally they would enroll 2, 3, 4 times, or maybe just in an ongoing manner. Incentive design has many features and variation as well. The frequency with which incentives are distributed can be as often as quarterly, but are most commonly paid annually. Some programs help customers hedge risk by providing some upfront incentives for often 25% or 50% of anticipated savings, and then pay a performance-based incentive based on meter savings beyond that. Incentive rates for pay-for-performance programs are different than custom dollar per kWh savings or per decatherm savings seen in other programs, and do vary. Tiered incentives are another program design decision that varies. However, many implementers saw this as a best practice for helping send customers a price signal to go after deeper savings. So a higher dollar per energy amount of energy saved is achieved as you go deeper. Transparency platforms. Most pay-for-performance programs provide performance visibility through an application such as Green Button. However, even more detailed transparency can help increase operator and equipment installer accountability. Eligibilities were also common. Some utilities require an upfront study to help estimate anticipated savings, and the study must show savings ranging from 5 up to 20% of total building energy use before participating. Lastly, meter technology varies, and most utilities did have advanced metering infrastructure in place, but not all. So, from some national observations, we're going to talk about key building and development trends. With increasing deployment of time of use rates, there is growing value to the customer, and that is the value that is measured, meter-based savings, especially at targeted times. Meaning that there's kind of greater value around demand shifting. Second trend observed is how new buildings and renovated buildings are getting more complicated and more connected. The graphic here on the right shows that 58% of facilities being built today have smart capabilities, such as those controlling lights and room temperature. Also, 49% of buildings have applications to allow users or property managers to access building services or even to navigate the property. They're just getting more connected. Third, outcome-based codes, energy design assistance, and benchmarking programs are all increasing and are all focused on whole building meter-based performance. Cities and businesses are looking to meet climate reduction goals, and they are getting more focused on how to accelerate performance and go beyond just setting targets and tracking energy use. Also, utilities are seeing growing interest in new construction programs as they offer early positive engagement with new customers. Fourth, I touched on this briefly before, but more utilities are implementing whole building and measure agnostic, kind of a term of art there, programs, and there is a movement to understand how to measure and capture these energy savings for regulators and customer perspectives. The drivers and target markets in other states. We're going to briefly talk about drivers in other states because it helps bring context to what makes sense in Minnesota today or potentially in the future. Higher rates increase the desire for customer choice and motivated by bill savings in other states. Also, high performance customers that want other choices help meeting corporate sustainability goals was looked at as another driver. Energy service companies requesting pay-for-performance services was another driver that utilities saw. And lastly, climate policy. These policies helped utilities drive at going deeper in conservation. As was mentioned before, the target markets in other states focused on large commercial, high-performing customer types, sometimes even limited or focused on MUSH, or municipal university schools and hospitals. And some programs even focused on those served by district energy providers. Facilities with 24-hour operations were identified as customer types that should not participate because their ability to control their use is likely very inelastic. Increasingly, new construction pay-for-performance programs tended to be less restrictive on customer size and type. Overall, we collected a number of lessons learned from utility programs, program providers, and experts at the national level. Program marketing and recruitment is a challenge. Early on, program uptake is slow, and ramping up participation can take time. It is also hard to make programs easy to understand, considering some of the nuance and detail that is important to describe to customers, such as measurement and verification protocols, baselines, and incentive structures. Multiple programs are not fully leveraging behavioral science strategies to motivate and trigger building operator action. These programs lack more touches with customers, and they lack tools that are well integrated into the program design, such as dashboards or other customer communication that helps provide operators customize and timely recommendations and triggers to help enact action. Looking at some utility annual reports and regulatory filings, in most cases, new construction programs are more cost effective than existing building programs in the pay-for-performance realm. Lastly, some markets see incentives direct to a contractor as the most effective pay-for-performance model. Other utilities see opportunities in providing incentives directly and indirectly to customers. The key is to find the best leverage point and who are the actors and deciders in a building and provide incentives there. Turning to Minnesota observations and just a recap of what data sources were used at the top of the slide. Here we break down key customer interests by stakeholders that we heard from. Building operators across the board were interested in piloting pay-for-performance offerings. They were also interested in operational recommendations that reflected their actual performance, that more high-touch technical assistance. Building portfolio managers are looking for ways to bring more value to owners and to reduce operating costs. They stated a willingness to take on some incentive risk or forego upfront incentives to do this to get at lower operating costs, and that the innovation alone had a value to them and to their building owners. The innovation being the innovative program approach. Building owners were also in part of our outreach. Some businesses talked about a culture of performance and are more broadly interested in performance, not just in energy performance. They like the idea of a program that helps them stretch for ongoing improvement and a channel for learning. They also stated how they know they should be setting targets more and chasing those, and would like to know that savings they're achieving compared to anticipated savings and their targets. Architects shared that they think helping a client think long-term about energy bill savings and bringing that into the design conversation could help them differentiate themselves as a firm in the marketplace. Briefly, I just want to show you this chart. We used this to help spur conversation during our focus group with building operators and portfolio property managers. In this conversation, we heard that an incentive structure that can help a customer reduce their project payback by 6 months or more is intriguing to them. If this could be offered, they would be willing to take on more of a performance-based mindset and risk receiving less incentive than they might today under an upfront deemed savings rebate model. But they would want help along the way from utilities to help them be successful in actually performing. The idea here is that in a deemed savings approach, you might be that dotted black line, but if you were a high performer, might you be able to shift your project cost payback left on this chart, moving maybe from towards the darker green lines, not towards the orange line to the right. Concerns expressed by customers were also captured. Building operators wanted help quantifying rebate risk or the extent to which the customer might receive a lower amount of incentive overall compared to the business as usual upfront rebates. They were interested in approaches that would help lower this risk, such as hybrid upfront rebates and performance-based incentive approaches. We also heard that receiving incentives more often than annually would be preferred, but overall the delay in incentives was not a primary issue. Building owners and managers expressed a strong interest in having access to tools or safety valves that help customers know if and when they are the right fit for the program. Architects did express the most concern about the loss of upfront incentives. they said that these incentives are important for preventing some high-performance design decisions from being value engineered out, and that this should be looked at. We also collected utility concerns and interests. All utilities express the value of time-based energy savings and inquired if this was an opportunity within pay-for-performance, if the pay-for-performance model could help capture this. They also expressed concerns about cost effectiveness of this approach, including the cost of implementing measurement and verification. While most utilities do not have deep awareness of pay-for-performance in Minnesota as a model broadly, this concern of cost-effective M&V was brought up in the context of Minnesota having lower cost of energy and thus lower avoided costs. We also heard concern for how asset-based measures and behavioral savings need to be treated differently, meaning that behavioral savings need to apply the average savings method, which does not need to be applied to asset-based measures. This accounting challenge was flagged as discouraging or possibly discounting the value of a whole building approach. Lastly, some utilities mention the challenges of how to not eat away at the averaging approach of deemed savings, which, if customers have a path towards performance-based incentives or deemed-based incentives, that they are concerned about this. In a brief summary, many of the concerns heard can be addressed through program design decisions, such as how to target the right customers and lower risks for them, or how to partner with, say, district energy utilities on customer engagement. As non-regulated utilities that don't have direct access to Conservation Improvement Program or CIP incentives, these customers are often good candidates, but may not be motivated by higher potential incentives because of the lower earned incentive potential, meaning part of their energy is being provided by a utility that does not have access to those incentives. The concerns about measurement and verification remain the most challenging. Concerns of cost effectiveness will likely require measurement and verification technologies and best practices to become more efficient and accurate, or regulators will need to determine if there is a deeper value to meter-based savings that is worth a higher, verification or capture cost. Other challenges, such as accounting for different types of energy savings, may be eased through stakeholder conversations looking at acceptable practices for whole building pay-for-performance in Minnesota. Broadly, the target markets we looked at were divided into two groups. First, when incentives are being provided directly to customers. Most of our analysis focused on target markets A and B, as this is where the greatest focus has been at the national level, and thus where our exploration was focused. Target market A is large, high-performance existing buildings. These are customers that are generally over 100,000 square feet and that have an on-site energy manager and or building automation system. They may already be setting performance targets on a regular or project basis, or are interested in interacting in this practice, integrating this practice. Target market B consists of commercial new construction and major renovation projects, small or large in size. These customers would be engaged through the developer and would be focused on customers that are building to own. The second category is really for incentives that are being provided to second or third parties. And this can hit on a swath of commercial customers potentially. Target market C includes moderate and small commercial buildings through commercial property portfolio managers. This could allow pay-for-performance offerings to reach more mid-sized commercial buildings, but still leverage properties that have access to expert facility staff and active property managers. Lastly, Target Market D addresses a third-party provider approach, such as energy efficiency program administrators and energy service companies, or ESCOs, that contract with businesses to deliver energy savings and performance. This will also focus on high-performance customers, but could follow an aggregator model, which these providers are then incentivized to go after deeper savings across their own portfolio of work, potentially allowing them to hit a broader array of building types and sizes. The team evaluated existing programs and services in the marketplace as delivery channels and identified those that had the most supportive characteristics. Those that are most supportive were identified as programs with near-term pairing potential. Others were included and noted as having long-term opportunities for pairing, meaning being able to have a path with pay-for-performance incentives, not just deemed savings incentives. The criteria that were used included deeper savings potential, customer engagement strategies already in place, the ability to integrate performance targets within those programs or services, monthly or regular measurement and verification already being conducted, and fifth, potential to influence peak kilowatts, or already doing this, or that this could be a reasonable addition to the program. The programs that were ranked highest included high-performance new construction programs, as you can see on the right in the yellow boxes, energy service companies, ongoing monitoring or operational efficiency programs as well. Benchmarking, builder-operator training, and customer efficiency programs were also flagged as having long-term opportunities. Excuse the blue and yellow legend colors being inverted. Broadly speaking, the statewide potential was calculated based on existing programs and channels that could be leveraged. Energy savings from target market A equaled 131,000 MMBTU and 24,000 or 25,000 MMBTU for target market B. And for target market C, 23,000 MMBTU is what was observed. We did not dive into target market D as there are a lot of variables, and that was not a focus of this study. We're now going to briefly take some time to look at two different case studies that helped the team illustrate a few challenges and practicalities of implementation of pay for performance, both from a customer perspective and implementer perspective. The table that you see at the bottom, we'll walk through that first. This table captures deemed savings incentives received by a customer and compares them to what they would have received under a pay-for-performance model given historic, baseline, and performance periods. We looked at three different cases of incentives: a low incentive rate, a moderate incentive rate, and high incentive rates, and applied those rates both for electricity and separately for natural gas. For this customer, they would have received a larger incentive under the deemed savings approach unless they had participated in the program multiple times. As you can see on the bottom line of this table, if they participated 3 times, assuming a 3-year participation period, so 9 years in total, with a moderate or high incentive rate, they would have been better off compared to the deemed savings approach. This could have also been improved if incentives were structured to provide a higher rate or dollar per energy unit saved for deeper savings, which is not accounted for here. But that gives you a sense of what the comparison from a customer perspective would look like. And you're comparing under the deemed savings part of the table, the $14,000 number to what's in the yellow boxes on the right side of the table. So there are opportunities for this customer to have ongoing technical customer assistance. This was very important to them and just a value that they were interested in with pay-for-performance program structure in general. If technical assistance was going to be provided, they were open to a slightly more risky incentive approach, but maybe not to this extent. However, as we said, re-enrollment is really important, and it starts to help us think through how we can compare lifetime savings and how we think about that in a deemed savings setting to what performance-based incentives or meter-based incentives might look like, and how they're not apples to apples, but how we have to think how they look side by side. Also, a screening tool could really be helpful for a customer like this. Maybe they would decide that they aren't interested in a performance-based approach and they'd rather stick with a deemed savings model, or that they would maybe not have the best fit upon screening. Or that they would be in higher touch with their program provider or utility to make sure that they hit performance targets. So in case study D, we looked at a different building. The previous building was a school, and this is an office building. This table compares deemed savings incentives received by a customer to what they would have received under the pay-for-performance model as well. For this customer, under all scenarios explored, other than the lowest incentive rate scenario, the pay-for-performance approach would have earned the customer a greater incentive. If they were able to replicate that type of performance or meter-based savings year over year for 2 more performance periods, so say 9 years total, they could have been motivated and supported to receive significant incentives. And obviously the numbers here are quite large as you get into the furthest right columns. But these are just models or scenarios for us to be able to compare and think about how we apply incentive rates today under a deemed savings model, and how those might apply in a performance-based scenario, and how that plays out with re-enrollment. There's really potential here for increased customer benefit in a financial sense. This customer really has been active in managing their energy use and would be a great candidate for pay for performance. And that they were interested in some of the other values that could be provided in a pay for performance model, such as technical assistance and greater transparency to their energy use, but financially they would likely benefit, at least retrospectively. So there's a lot of details that we uncovered in this work, but to boil it down to 4 recommendations, we pointed out that it would be important to host a broad discussion on the value of measure or meter-based savings. There is not a lot of detailed discussion that's happened on this topic yet in Minnesota, and understanding how we value this as an industry and the value to customers and the public good, it is a key question for understanding how we might utilize a pay-for-performance model. Second, we recommend developing a whole building pay-for-performance method for claiming energy savings to support measured savings or meter-based savings in the growing context of advanced metering infrastructure. Third, we recommend that the state of Minnesota adopt a measurement and verification protocol that targets new construction building. We actually do not currently have one that is approved. That doesn't mean that they cannot be used, but there is not one that's approved and verified. And that if this is a key opportunity or more cost-effective opportunity for pay for performance, this would be good to help provide some further guidance on. And fourth, we recommend implementing a whole building pay-for-performance pilot program with one or more utilities to demonstrate that high-performance large commercial customer, the value to high-performance large commercial customers. So with that, I think we still have time for some questions.
Yes, we do. We started about 5 minutes late, so if it takes us over a little bit by 5 minutes, we'll do that in order to answer all the questions that we have. I hope, sorry for the inconvenience on that, but that was a great presentation. Thanks, Megan, for that. If you have not already done so, please send us your questions via the Q&A box in the WebEx panel and send them to all panelists. Anthony, do you have any questions for Megan?
Well, we don't have any questions so far through the Q&A panel. I do have a couple of questions that I wanted to run by Megan, and while we're going through those, if anybody does have any questions, please send them through, and we'll be happy to relay them to Megan. So first of all, on the slide where you talked about program characteristics, you said that the performance period could vary from 1 year to more than 20 years. Could you talk more about what accounts for this wide variation? Does it depend on the type of retrofit package that is implemented, or is it a different reason?
It's a really good question. We really saw that it varied for a variety of reasons, and I think it is that we're in a period of a lot of piloting and testing across the country, and that some of the earliest programs were starting up around the same time. And so you just saw different practices coming forward, and in some cases they've stuck with what they started with. I would say that most programs were hitting that 3 to 5 year period, probably most commonly the 3-year period. And I think from a customer perspective, at least in Minnesota, they thought that 1 year seemed too short. They actually sort of preferred a 2 or 3 year period of time. And the 20-year period of time was sort of a standout example in Seattle and Seattle City Lights program, where they've used a model that's called MEETS, MEETS. That's actually a proprietary name, and it's a certain type of pay-for-performance model that's really unique. And I'm not going to go into detail because it takes a bit of time to describe, but it sort of requires a long threshold or a long period of time. So that's where the 20-year example came from.
So next question, you mentioned a peer building design in your presentation. Could you describe what that entails?
You repeat the question. There's about building design?
Yeah, you mentioned a peer building design.
Oh, peer, yes, thank you. So, right, this was an interesting best practice that we saw emerging in how baselines were being created, particularly in the new construction types of programs. So instead of a pretty human resource intensive effort to model a building and what its energy use should be based on its design characteristics and decisions, that how baselines were being created, at least in 2 markets with 2 different programs, is that they were using peer buildings, and that included at least 4 or 5 buildings being averaged, their energy use being averaged, and kind of creating an average energy use curve over the year, and that they would be normalizing for weather use and for occupancy the data from those buildings, but that they would be selecting buildings that are in the same climate zone and that are of the same general size and the same use type. So sort of peer buildings as a frame of reference as opposed to a model. And that seems to be a little bit less resource intensive and but also seems to be working in a fair manner. And I think I may have missed saying that they would also be, those peer buildings would also have been built to the same energy code, so in a relatively similar time frame to them, maybe a year or two earlier.
Okay, thanks. And then the final question that I have, can you give an example or two of the hybrid program design that you saw in your investigation and talk about what it looked like and how well that worked?
Yeah, this seems to be a growing trend as well. I think that, in states where they are implementing a pay-for-performance approach, you end up having a dichotomy of incentive offerings. You can get upfront rebates, as we see today here in Minnesota, but for customers that are interfacing with this for the first time, it feels like there's an opportunity cost perhaps to going after a performance-based approach where there's some risk in that. And so the hybrid approach, I think, is a way to help bridge people and the marketplace as there maybe a utility and or regulators are moving more towards performance-based incentives, and many programs required that a study or sort of a screening be done for a customer before they participated in a program, and that they might require somewhere between 5% total building energy use and 20% total building energy use to be able to hopefully be reduced through the program. And that based on that estimate, that they would provide a percentage of the anticipated energy savings in an upfront rebate. And then that would kind of help hedge some of the risk, provide a little bit of an upfront incentive, and then they would still get some benefit and or be pushed, to perform and have incentives that were based on actual performance too. And usually we saw that the upfront was somewhere in the 25 to 50% range, and then the latter and the remainder of that. So usually about a third, 2/3 or 50-50 split. I hope that was helpful.
Great, thanks, Megan. With that, if there are, I'm not seeing any questions, but if you did have questions following the webinar, please feel free to reach out to one of the three of us at the email addresses on the slide right there. And with that, many thanks to Megan and the CE team for their work on this project, and I'll hand back to Mary Sue.
Great. Thanks, Anthony, and thanks, Megan. I just wanted to point out here at the end that the recording of this webinar will be available on the Department's Applied Research and Development webpage at a later date, hopefully within a couple of weeks. When available, you'll be able to link to it from the webinar quick link that's shown on this page, on this slide. The final report will also be available, more like probably a couple of months for that. And this R&D page that's being shown right now on the slide has additional resources and information related to the CARD program and to CARD research projects that you can check out by going to the address at the bottom of this slide. Thanks for participating today. We really appreciate your interest in card projects. Before we leave, I wanted to take a moment to mention another couple of upcoming webinars. On April 1st, Cadmus will be presenting the results from their market study on cold climate air source heat pumps in residential households in Minnesota. And on May 27th, Cadmus will be back to review the results of an economic impact analysis of the Conservation Improvement Program. This will be kind of an update, or this will be an update on the 2015 economic analysis that Cadmus also did. In addition, there's a third webinar on the horizon, which CEE did, taking a fresh look at cooling loads in Minnesota. So you can keep abreast of upcoming webinars and other news related to the Conservation Improvement Program through our SIP newsletter. The link on this slide can be used to sign up for the newsletter. In the meantime, if you have questions, feedback, or suggestions for the CARD program or CARD webinars, please feel free to contact me. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day.